The wind screamed through the twisted trees of the Hinterkaifeck farm, an ancient, desolate place nestled deep in the Bavarian woods, far from the nearest village, a place where light struggled to reach, and where the land seemed to suck the warmth from the air. The Gruber family, Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and her two children, Joseph and Cecilia Jr., lived in eerie isolation, as if the earth itself wanted to keep them buried in its cold, suffocating grip. For months they had been plagued by strange occurrences. Doors and windows left wide open, strange sounds in the attic, and, most terrifying of all, footsteps in the snow leading to the house, but never away. Someone or something had been watching them from the shadows. The family grew paranoid, but they didn't leave. They couldn't. Then, on the night of March 31st, 1922, the nightmare began. The storm outside howled, the wind like the screams of the damned. The Grubers lay in their beds, tense and fearful, hearts racing as each creak and groan of the house made them jump. But nothing could prepare them for the brutal carnage that awaited. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, was the first to die. He was alone in his room when the killer struck. The blow of the pickaxe was so violent it splintered his skull, sending a geyser of blood spraying across the room, drenching the walls and ceiling in a crimson tide. His body crumpled, eyes wide open, his mouth frozen in an eternal scream. But the murderer didn't stop. No, he relished the bloodshed. Cecilia, Andreas's wife, was next. She awoke to the sounds of her husband's brutal death, her heart hammering in her chest. She tried to scream, but before she could open her mouth, the killer was already on her. The pickaxe came down with a sickening thud, splitting her chest open, the blade sinking deep into her heart. Blood poured from her body like a torrent, staining the sheets, splattering across the room, and pooling on the floor beneath her. The killer moved on, his bloodlust growing with each life taken. Victoria, still asleep in her bed, was next. The killer didn't give her a chance to wake. He brought the pickaxe down with terrifying force, smashing through her skull in one swift motion. Her blood exploded across the bed, soaking the mattress, her face contorted in a twisted mask of pain and terror. Her screams were drowned out by the sickening crack of bone, her body crumpling beneath the weight of the murder. But there was more to come. The children, Joseph and Cecilia Jr., woke to the horrific sounds of their family being slaughtered. Their hearts raced, but before they could even comprehend the nightmare, the killer was on them. Joseph, no older than 7, tried to run, but the killer was faster. He grabbed the child, his small body struggling helplessly in the murderer's grip. With a savage swing, the pickaxe slammed into Joseph's skull, shattering his head in a gory explosion of bone and brain matter. The child's body collapsed, lifeless to the floor, a puddle of blood spreading around him like a grotesque halo. Cecilia Jr., the youngest, was dragged through the house, her cries piercing the air, but there was no escape. The killer's hands wrapped around her fragile neck, and with one swift motion, he slashed her throat open. Blood sprayed across the room, flooding the floor as she gasped for breath, her body jerking violently in her final moments. The last breath left her body with a choking sound as her blood poured out of her like a rushing river. The house was now drenched in blood, but the killer wasn't done. Not yet. After slaughtering the family, the murderer stayed. For days he remained on the farm, living among the corpses. He fed off the food in the kitchen, slept in their beds, and used the farmhouse as his twisted playground. The bloodied bodies of the Grubers lay like discarded meat, twisted in unnatural positions, their blood staining the floors and walls in grotesque patterns. The killer treated their once-loved home as his own, as if nothing had ever happened. He washed the blood off his hands in the kitchen sink, using the very dishes the family had eaten from Dot. And for days, he hid in the shadows, blending into the death as if it was his natural habitat. Neighbors grew concerned after a few days when no one had seen the Grubers. The maid was sent to check on them. She knocked on the door but received no answer. When she pushed it open, the stench of rotting flesh hit her like a hammer, almost knocking her to her knees. She stepped inside, and the sight that greeted her froze her blood in her veins. The family's bodies were sprawled across the house. Andreas was in the bedroom, his skull smashed open like a watermelon, his brains and blood scattered across the room. Cecilia lay next to him, her chest hollowed out, her heart nowhere to be found. Victoria's face had been obliterated, her head reduced to a pulpy mess of bone, blood, and tissue. Joseph's skull was a jagged mess, his brains leaking out of the shattered remains of his head. Cecilia Jr. was a pile of blood, her small body barely recognizable, her throat slit wide open, the blood still dripping from her body. The horror didn't stop there. The killer had left behind a message. His presence lingered. The blood was still fresh, sticky in the air, but the murderer had vanished. No trace, no evidence. Only the blood-soaked remains of the Gruber family and a house that had become a monument to death. The authorities came, but they could find no trace of the killer, no footprints in the snow, no fingerprints on the bloody pickaxe, nothing. It was as if the murderer had simply disappeared into the air, vanishing as if they had never existed. Rumors swirled. Some said the killer was still out there, hiding in the woods, waiting to strike again. Others said the evil of Hinterkaifeck had consumed the land itself, and that the killer was never human at all, but something much darker, much older. To this day, the place remains cursed, the bloodstains long gone, but the whispers of death still hang in the air, the cries of the murdered family echoing in the woods. Those brave enough or foolish enough to venture near the site still report strange noises at night. Footsteps in the snow, whispers on the wind, the unmistakable scent of blood, and the farm, abandoned and crumbling, still stands as a silent monument to the horror that unfolded there.